From the outside, the Holloways seemed to have it all. A loving marriage. A beautiful daughter. A life that looked picture-perfect. They were the kind of family people admired, successful, devoted and unbreakable. But behind the carefully curated images and warm smiles lay something far more sinister. A secret so dangerous, so unthinkable, that when it came to light, it would destroy everything in its path. It started with a betrayal. A temptation that should have never been acted upon. A moment of weakness that turned into something far more dangerous. Lines were crossed, boundaries shattered, and soon, what should have remained hidden began to fester beneath the surface. But secrets, no matter how deeply buried, always have a way of coming to light. When the truth was finally exposed, it was not just hearts that were broken, it was lives. The confrontation that followed would not be settled with words. Instead, it would spiral into a storm of rage, pain, and violence so brutal that by the time it was over, there was no turning back. What could drive a devoted husband and father to the brink of madness? How does love twist into something so dark, so unforgiving, that it ends in bloodshed? This is not just a story of infidelity, it is a story of obsession, betrayal, and the horrifying lengths some will go to when their world comes crashing down. Before we unravel the horrifying details of this case, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because trust me, you won't believe how this one ends. For 17 years, Malcolm and Chantrice Holloway built what seemed like an unshakable foundation. A beautiful home, a solid marriage, a daughter they adored. Their life was the kind that inspired admiration, successful, stable, and deeply rooted in love. Chantrice, at 41, was a well-respected nurse practitioner, known for her grace and sharp intellect. She was the type of woman people looked up to, elegant, confident, and deeply committed to her family. Her social media was filled with posts celebrating Black love, preaching the importance of strong marriages, and showing off the life she and Malcolm had worked so hard to build. Malcolm, at 45, was a man of discipline and quiet strength. He had built his contracting business from the ground up, earning the respect of his Ohio community. He wasn't flashy or loud, just a man who believed in hard work, loyalty, and providing for his family. Through the years, he had stood by Chantrice, supported her career, and together, they had raised their only daughter, Zuria, with love and guidance. To everyone on the outside, they were an unbreakable team. But behind the closed doors of their home, the cracks in their marriage were growing wider. It started subtly. A change in tone, a lingering silence, the way Chantrice pulled away from Malcolm's touch at night. The connection they once shared was fading. 17 years of marriage had taken its toll, and though neither of them wanted to admit it, something between them had shifted. Then, there was Zuria, 19, young, full of life, and deeply in love. A sophomore in college, she was everything her parents had dreamed she would be, bright, ambitious, and fearless in her pursuit of happiness. And at the center of her happiness was Jameer Watkins. Jameer was the kind of young man parents wanted for their daughter. At 21, he had a promising future, a sharp mind, and a talent for football that could take him all the way to the pros. He and Zuria were inseparable, their love story playing out like something from a movie. She filled her social media with pictures of them, late-night drives, campus dates, sweet captions about their future. "My future husband," she called him. Their bond was strong, unshakable, or so she thought. The Holloways were admired for their strength, their unity, their unwavering faith in each other. But admiration is built on perception, and perception is rarely the full truth. Because hidden beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family was a secret so devastating, so unthinkable, that when it finally came to light, it would destroy them all. Chantrice Holloway had spent years being the perfect wife. The doting mother. The devoted partner. The respected professional. But perfection is exhausting, and beneath her polished exterior, something was unraveling. The passion in her marriage had long faded, replaced by routine, responsibility, and quiet resentment. Malcolm was a good man, steady, dependable, but their connection had grown distant. Nights spent lying beside him felt lonelier than ever, and soon, she found herself longing for something more. Something exciting. Something forbidden. And then, there was Jameer. He was everything Malcolm wasn't: young, bold, and hungry for life. The way he carried himself, the effortless charm, the athletic build that spoke of power and energy. Chantrice had noticed it before, but she had always dismissed it. "He's just a boy," she told herself. "Your daughter's boyfriend." But the way he looked at her, the way his eyes lingered just a little too long, the way his voice dropped into something lower, smoother, whenever they were alone, it made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. At first, it was nothing. A casual compliment here, a playful touch there. She told herself it was harmless. Innocent. But deep down, she knew the truth. She felt the way her pulse quickened when he was around. How she held his gaze just a little too long. How she imagined, late at night, what it would feel like if he ever crossed that line. And one night, he did. Zuria was out with friends, and Malcolm was working late. It was just the two of them in the Holloway home. Jameer had come over to wait for Zuria, but as the minutes ticked by, he didn't leave. They sat in the kitchen, sipping wine, the conversation dancing around things it shouldn't. He told her she didn't look like a woman in her 40s. That she was finer than half the girls his age. That if she weren't his girlfriend's mother, well, she could have any man she wanted. She should have stopped it. She should have sent him home. But instead, she leaned in, her fingers grazing his hand. And in that moment, whatever thin line had existed between them disappeared. The first time was rushed, frantic, charged with the kind of electricity neither of them had felt before. It happened right there in the Holloway living room, on the very couch where Zuria and Jameer had once sat, curled up together, planning their future. But in that moment, there was no guilt, no regret. Only need. After that night, stopping was never an option. The affair spiraled into something neither of them could control. Hotel rooms booked under fake names. Late-night meetings in his car, their bodies tangled in the dark. Even in the Holloway home, with Malcolm asleep upstairs, they stole moments whenever they could. It was reckless. Dangerous. Addictive. Jameer told himself it was just a thrill, an adrenaline rush, something to feed his ego. But Chantrice? She convinced herself it was love. That he made her feel alive in ways Malcolm never could. That he saw her, truly saw her, as more than just a wife and mother. And so, they told themselves it would stay a secret. That Zuria and Malcolm would never know. But secrets have a way of surfacing. And once this one did, there would be no turning back. Zuria had spent the entire afternoon planning the perfect date night. Jameer had been distant lately, distracted, his texts shorter, his calls less frequent. Maybe school and training were weighing on him. Maybe he was stressed. Whatever it was, she wanted to remind him how much she loved him. How much they meant to each other. She bought his favorite food, picked up a bottle of wine, something sweet that she knew he liked, and headed to his apartment. It was supposed to be a surprise. Something spontaneous. Something romantic. But the moment she arrived, something felt off. The door was unlocked, slightly ajar. That was strange. Jameer was usually careful about things like that. She stepped inside, balancing the takeout bag in one hand, calling his name. No answer. Then, she heard it. Soft, breathy moans. At first, her brain refused to process it. Maybe the TV was on. Maybe he was watching something. But as she took slow, hesitant steps toward the bedroom, the sounds became clearer. Louder. The rhythmic creaking of the bed, the gasps, the whispered name. Her mother's name. Zuria's stomach twisted violently. No. She couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. For a brief, terrifying second, she thought she might pass out. But then, as if propelled by something outside of herself, her feet carried her forward. She reached the bedroom door, hesitated just a moment, and pushed it open. Time stopped. There they were, tangled in the sheets, bodies glistening with sweat. Her mother. Her mother. On top of him, moving in a way that made Zuria's entire world crack open. The scream that tore from her throat didn't even sound human. It was raw, animalistic, drenched in betrayal and agony. Shantrai scrambled off Jameer, clutching the sheets to her chest, her face frozen in sheer horror. Jameer, still breathless, stared at Zuria as if he had just seen a ghost. "Baby," Shantrai started, reaching out. "Don't touch me!" Zuria shrieked, stumbling backward. Her vision blurred, but the image was burned into her mind forever. Her mother. Naked. In bed. With her boyfriend. She felt like she was going to throw up. Listen, please," Jameer stammered, swinging his legs off the bed, searching for his boxers. Zuria's entire body trembled. "How long?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "How long has this been going on?" Neither of them answered. The silence was louder than any confession. Zuria let out a broken sob, turning and bolting out of the apartment, her feet pounding against the floor as she ran. She ran as fast as she could, the walls of her world closing in, her lungs burning, her heart shattering into pieces too small to ever put back together. By the time she reached home, she could barely see through her tears. She burst through the door and collapsed into Malcolm's arms, her body shaking violently. "Baby, what is it?" Malcolm asked, his voice thick with concern. But Zuria couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. The words choked her, suffocated her. How could she even say it? How could she tell her father that his wife, the woman he had loved, trusted, built a life with, had just destroyed everything? Somehow, through ragged sobs, the truth tumbled out. And Malcolm went completely still. For a moment, Zuria thought he might not have heard her. But then, slowly, his entire body tensed, his jaw clenched so hard she thought his teeth might break. His breathing turned sharp, shallow. His hands curled into tight fists. And then, without a word, he turned, walked to the corner of the room, and grabbed his baseball bat. Zuria's breath hitched. "Dad!" But Malcolm was already out the door. And the look in his eyes said that someone was about to die. Malcolm's heart pounded like a war drum. The bat in his grip felt like an extension of his rage, his fury flowing through the wood, tightening his grip until his knuckles turned white. He barely remembered the drive to Jameer's apartment. His mind was blank, a deep, all-consuming darkness swallowing every rational thought. The only thing that existed was betrayal. Pain. Rage. By the time he reached the door, he didn't bother knocking. He didn't hesitate. He kicked it open with a force that rattled the walls. Jameer was still in the bedroom, hurriedly pulling on his clothes, panic written all over his face. He barely had time to register what was happening before Malcolm was on him. The first swing landed with a sickening crack against Jameer's skull. Blood sprayed across the bed, the walls, the floor. He staggered, dazed, a deep gash splitting open above his brow. "Wait," Jameer choked, holding up his hands. Malcolm didn't wait. He swung again, this time catching Jameer's ribs. The younger man let out a strangled cry as the impact sent him crashing into the nightstand. The lamp toppled over, shattering on the floor. The room plunged into shadows, lit only by the dim glow from the hallway. Jameer tried to crawl away, but Malcolm was relentless. A swing to the shoulder, crack. A blow to the jaw, shatter. Jameer's screams filled the apartment, raw and desperate. He tried to shield his head, but Malcolm was merciless. His fingers bent at unnatural angles as the bat shattered them one by one. Blood pooled beneath him, thick and dark. His body convulsed, spasming, choking on his own blood. His screams turned into wet gurgles. Malcolm didn't stop until Jameer was still. The only sound left in the room was the dripping of blood. Malcolm stood over him, chest heaving, his grip on the bat tightening as he turned toward the doorway. Chantrice stood there, trembling, her hands covering her mouth. Her wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto Malcolm's. "Please, baby, please don't." Her voice was small, weak. It made his rage burn hotter. He stepped toward her, slow and deliberate. Each step soaked his shoes in Jameer's blood, leaving behind dark footprints as he closed the distance. Chantrice backed away, shaking her head. "I messed up, Malcolm. I did. But please." He didn't let her finish. The bat swung, colliding with the side of her face. Bone crunched under the force, sending her sprawling onto the floor. Blood dripped from her nose, her mouth, staining her white blouse a deep crimson. She sobbed, crawling backward, but Malcolm grabbed her by the hair, yanking her up until they were face to face. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I love you," she whispered. Malcolm's expression didn't change. His hands moved from her hair to her throat. And then, he squeezed. Chantrice gasped, clawing at his arms, struggling, kicking. Her nails dug into his skin, leaving bloody scratches. But Malcolm didn't let go. Her legs thrashed, then slowed. Her hands, once gripping his wrists with all her strength, started to weaken. And then, nothing. Her body went limp in his hands. He let go, watching as she crumpled to the floor, her lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling. The room smelled like blood, sweat, and betrayal. Malcolm stepped over their bodies, moving in slow, measured strides toward the front door. He didn't run. He didn't wipe the blood off his hands. He walked home in eerie silence, the bat dragging against the pavement behind him. When he reached his house, he didn't go inside. Instead, he sat on the porch, the weight of what he had done settling into his bones. His hands, still slick with blood, trembled slightly as he pulled a cigarette from his pocket, lighting it with steady fingers. The smoke curled into the night air as he stared into the distance, his face unreadable. Neighbors peeked through their windows, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Some whispered. Others grabbed their phones. By the time the police arrived, Malcolm was still sitting there, the cigarette burning down to the filter. He didn't resist. He simply lifted his hands in surrender. The story was everywhere. News anchors spoke of it with hushed urgency, their voices laced with shock and disbelief. Social media boiled over with opinions, arguments, and theories. A respected businessman and father, driven to an unspeakable act of violence. A wife whose secret desires led to her brutal demise. A daughter caught in the crossfire of betrayal and bloodshed. Some saw Malcolm Holloway as a man undone by love and humiliation, a victim of the kind of deceit that shatters souls. How much pain can a man endure before he snaps? They asked. What would any husband, any father, do in his position? Others saw him as nothing more than a cold-blooded murderer. Pain doesn't justify brutality, they argued. Betrayal doesn't grant you to take a life. And then there was Zuria, the daughter caught in the middle, the young woman who had unknowingly exposed a secret that led to a bloodbath. Pictures of her flooded social media, smiling selfies, college event snapshots, throwback family photos with her parents. She became the face of devastation, of heartbreak, of the cruelest kind of betrayal. Talk show hosts dissected every detail. Podcast episodes analyzed the psychological weight of infidelity. True crime bloggers made video after video, piecing together the events like a tragic puzzle. But while the public debated, authorities worked to uncover the full story. Detectives traced the affair through text messages, long, intimate conversations filled with secret plans, passionate confessions, and reckless desire. They pulled surveillance footage from hotels, parking garages, even the Holloway home. They found receipts, late-night call logs, messages deleted too late to disappear completely. Each discovery painted the same disturbing picture: Chantrice and Jameer's affair wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was a full-blown relationship happening right under Malcolm's nose. Some people sympathized with Malcolm, calling his reaction human, a tragic explosion of pain from a man whose world had been shattered. They argued that any husband and father would have snapped in his shoes, that betrayal of that magnitude cuts deeper than most people could ever understand. Others refused to justify the murders. Nothing, not infidelity, not pain, not humiliation, could excuse the kind of savagery Malcolm unleashed that night. They saw him as a man who let rage strip him of all reason, who took 2 lives in an act of monstrous violence. The case became more than just a crime story. It became a conversation about marriage, loyalty, and toxic masculinity. About the way betrayal poisons the soul. About how love, when twisted by lies and deception, can turn deadly. And as Malcolm sat behind bars, awaiting his fate, the world continued to watch. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled, every eye fixed on the man who once had it all: a loving family, a successful business, a reputation as a devoted husband and father. Now, Malcolm Holloway sat at the defendant's table, wearing a suit that no longer fit him right, his face gaunt, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them together. He barely blinked as the trial began, as though he had already accepted his fate. His defense team painted a picture of a broken man, a husband betrayed in the most unimaginable way, a father whose world shattered the moment his daughter sobbed in his arms. They argued that Malcolm had acted in a blind rage, a temporary insanity fueled by unbearable emotional distress. He hadn't planned this. He hadn't premeditated anything. He had simply snapped. But the prosecution had a different story. To them, Malcolm wasn't just a grieving husband, he was a murderer, a man who had let his anger turn into bloodlust. He didn't just kill, he brutalized his victims. The crime scene told the story of a man who had taken his time, who had struck with such force that it spoke of something far beyond impulse. It was vengeance, they argued. Cold, calculated vengeance. The jury listened, eyes shifting between the attorneys, Malcolm, and the devastated young woman who had been forced to testify against her own father. Zuria took the stand, her voice barely above a whisper. She spoke of the moment she walked into that apartment, the moment she saw her mother wrapped in the arms of the man she loved. She spoke of the way her breath caught in her throat, how the world seemed to spin around her, how she had run without thinking, needing to get away. And then, how she found herself back home, her body shaking, her father's arms around her, how she had sobbed so hard she thought she might collapse. She paused before she spoke the next words. "I didn't know that when he let go of me, he was walking out that door to kill them." The courtroom was silent. Malcolm didn't look at her. 3 days. That's how long the jury deliberated. 3 days of arguments, of tension, of weighing the evidence against the emotion. When they returned, the air was thick with anticipation. Guilty. Malcolm Holloway was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder. The weight of the words didn't seem to register at first. He simply sat there, staring ahead, his expression unreadable. Maybe it was a relief. Maybe it was resignation. Maybe it was nothing at all. The sentencing came swiftly. Life in prison. No chance of parole. Before he was led away, Malcolm was given the opportunity to speak. He rose slowly, turning toward the judge, his voice steady but hollow. "I lost everything the moment I heard my daughter cry." And with that, he was escorted out, his footsteps echoing through the silent courtroom. Outside, the debate raged on. Some saw justice served. Others saw a good man whose life had been destroyed by betrayal, a man who had made the ultimate mistake in the heat of unbearable pain. But the reality was this: 3 lives lost. 1 to violence. 2 to death. And one young woman left to carry the weight of it all. Zuria never visited him. She changed her last name and moved to another state, trying to rebuild a life from the ruins of her family. Jameer's parents wept in the courtroom, their son's promising future reduced to nothing. Shantrice was buried in a closed casket, her once beautiful face too mangled for an open viewing. The Holloway home stood abandoned for months, a reminder of the horrors that unfolded within. Eventually, new tenants moved in, unaware of the bloody history that stained the walls. Betrayal. Rage. Bloodshed. 3 lives shattered beyond repair. What started as love, something meant to be pure, meant to last, became a ticking time bomb. The Holloways were admired, respected, the kind of family others aspired to be. But behind closed doors, a secret was festering, growing, waiting for the moment it would tear everything apart. One act of infidelity. One moment of weakness. One choice that set off a chain reaction of devastation. Shantrice followed her desires, believing she could keep her secret hidden. Jameer played with fire, never thinking it would consume him. And Malcolm, a man who had given his all to his family, let his pain swallow him whole, leaving nothing but blood and regret in its wake. Could this have ended differently? Was there ever a moment where this tragedy could have been stopped? If Shantrice had resisted temptation, if Jameer had walked away, if Malcolm had taken a breath before picking up that bat, would any of them still be here? Or was this ending always inevitable? What would you have done? Could you have forgiven a betrayal so deep? Or does love, when twisted into pain, always lead to destruction? If this case shocked you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more cases that reveal just how dark human nature can be. Until next time, stay safe, and trust wisely.